Welcome to Amish Shakil 5858. I'm a good man. Following are the news which are reported by American, Canadian, and European channels. Asian and African channels and the news agencies, Reuters, AFP, and AP have also reported the same news. Now the headlines. A large crane at Baltimore started recovering process. Black women contribution to American society in different fields. Medicaid and the needy people problems in America. Ukraine president fired many high-top officials, and Russia attacked Ukraine again, killing some people. Peru president has been under investigation. Israel attacked Lebanon again, injuring some UN personnel. A food ship for Gaza is ready to arrive. Cocoa cost in Canada increasing. Turbulence in flight. Pope condition is in secret. Rain, storm, snow, flood in Northern California. Now the news in detail.
Tonight on PBS News Weekend, the burden on women across the country as the primary caregivers for loved ones. Then, what's at stake for the tens of millions of Americans who rely on Medicaid, the nation's biggest government safety net program.
I go to the hospital a lot. I am in and out of appointments constantly. And so without it, there's a lot up in the air about what I could even do, what medications I could have, if I could still afford my medications.
And the story of a black woman who dedicated a lifetime to serving her country and her community.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by Certified Financial Planner Professionals are proud to support PBS News Weekend. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their clients' best interest. More information at letsmakeaplan.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the News Hour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm John Yang. Tensions ratcheted up today along the border between Lebanon and Israel. 3 UN military observers and a Lebanese interpreter were wounded in an explosion. They were patrolling the Lebanese side of the border as part of their peacekeeping mission. A UN spokesperson says they're investigating the source of the explosion and that the observer's vehicle was clearly marked and that all parties have been told about the patrol. Israel's military denied any involvement. Israeli troops and Hezbollah fighters have been training attacks across that border for weeks. Meanwhile, a convoy of 3 ships carrying 400 tons of food and other aid set sail for Gaza from Cyprus today. The UN has warned of imminent famine in Gaza. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky fired more of his top aides in his ongoing government reshuffle. It comes as Russia launched more drone and missile attacks on eastern Ukraine overnight, killing 2 people in Donetsk. Over the last 24 hours, there's been a barrage of strikes from Russia, many targeting energy infrastructure. Ukraine has put planned power outages in place for about 120,000 people in the region. In Peru, government agents raided the home of President Dina Boluarte as part of an investigation into a collection of luxury watches and whether they have been disclosed. Last night, a team used a battering ram to break down a door as they sought multiple Rolex timepieces. Boluarte has been president for a little more than a year, and she said she's owned at least one Rolex watch that she bought with her own money when she was 18 years old. Today, Boluarte defended herself, saying she's an honest woman with clean hands. And in Rome, Pope Francis presided over an Easter Vigil service at St. Peter's Basilica. He missed last night's Good Friday procession as a health precaution. The 87-year-old pontiff has limited his public appearances lately, even skipping his Palm Sunday homily. He's been struggling with respiratory problems. Still to come on PBS News Weekend, the role of the nation's largest health insurance program in America's safety net, and the hidden history of a black nurse who served her country in a variety of ways.
This is PBS News Weekend from WETA Studios in Washington, home of the PBS News Hour, weeknights on PBS.
America's population is aging. Currently, 1 in 6 is older than 65. By 2050, that's projected to be 1 in 4. Women bear the biggest part of the burden of caring for older Americans and their growing need for medical care and other support. Ali Rogan takes a look at the often unseen costs of caregiving.
In the United States, women make up almost 60% of unpaid caregivers and over 80% of paid in-home caregivers for seniors, according to a recent Wells Fargo report. Taking care of loved ones often takes a financial, physical, and emotional toll. We spoke to some women about their caregiving experience.
My name is Ruth, and I'm in Virginia, and I take care of my 82-year-old dad. It started about 12 years ago when he had prostate cancer.
Kenya Serbia. I'm from Bayboro, North Carolina, and I'm caring for my mom. I've been a caregiver since I was 8 years old. I started taking care of my great-grandma, then I was taking care of my grandma, and now I take care of my mom.
I'm Deonza Valencia. I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I am a family caregiver for my mother, Linda Valencia, who is 75 years old. One day our family learned that she was going to need a liver transplant, and she wasn't going to live much longer without it. So at a moment's notice, this responsibility fell on me. I was the one that had, the resources, the ability to leave home for a period of time and take care of my mom.
My name is Aileen Reese, and I took care of my mother for 15 years, and I'm currently taking care of my husband.
My biggest struggles have always been that this kind of also happened at the same time that I was finishing college and entering the workforce.
The hardest part is just sort of stepping into that being in charge role when they're, essentially they're your parents, so you're used to them being the person in charge.
You start neglecting your own doctor's appointments, and you neglect your own personal care. It's not good for the person that you are taking care of, and it's not good for yourself.
At times I felt like I wasn't doing a good job, and sometimes I still feel like I'm not doing a good enough job. I cannot focus at work because my dad, something happened this morning that really worries me, or I can't really be a good caregiver because my job is really stressing me and it's not really giving me the flexibility to be a good caregiver.
I literally had to leave a business that I had started up. I left the workforce completely to move to another state. I left behind a husband, and my marriage suffered because of it.
It's almost impossible to take care of someone else all by yourself. You really need to surround yourself with a community, a village.
Thankfully, I have uncles, cousins, aunts, in-laws, in-laws, my brother, neighbors, even if they're only able to come long enough to allow me to get a shower.
I wish that I would have known that there were others out there like me that were still struggling with the same financial issues, struggling with what to do next, and were frankly tired and could have used a little relief.
I also try to give myself as much grace as I can because, I think just showing up is already like 50% of the effort.
Just take it one day at a time. There'll be times when you'll get frustrated. There'll be times when you'll be overwhelmed. Stop, take as many breaks as you can. Don't be afraid to ask for help. You'll be surprised how willing people are to help.
Joining me now is Emily Kenway, author of Who Cares? The Hidden Crisis of Caregiving and How We Solve It, and a former caregiver herself. Emily, thank you so much for joining us. Can we start with your own caregiving journey? What did you go through, and when did you realize that this is indeed a crisis?
Yeah, so I cared for my mother. She was a single mum, which meant I needed to step in as her daughter when she was diagnosed with cancer in 2016. And obviously that was incredibly difficult personally, but it also woke me up politically to what's going on with caregiving around the world today. And we know that this is just going to get worse over time as well, right? So we have aging populations around the world. One demographer has called it the greying of America. And so we can all expect a greater and greater load of caring responsibilities and to be in the crisis that I was in unless we introduce major changes.
And when you talk about who's taking on those responsibilities, it is disproportionately women. Why have you found that to be so?
We have this historical heritage whereby around industrialization, we created this cultural norm, right, that the man goes to work and does waged work and the woman stays at home and does unpaid care. And we haven't caught up with today's reality at all because, of course, today more women are working. Many households need the women to work. Those wages are not things that can just be tossed aside. And so this idea that we can carry on ascribing to one gender all of the weight of care for our entire species is really outdated.
And given all those realities you just laid out, what are some of the challenges that women tend to face when they become caregivers?
Of course, there's a financial impact. Most of the time, if you're a caregiver, you'll need to reduce your working days and you may give up your work entirely. In fact, we know in the US, on average, women caregivers lose about $320,000 in lost income and lost social security benefits. And that doesn't just harm us right now, that means we're going to have real problem in retirement, right? Our security in old age is harmed just because we stepped in and did the right thing. There's also a massive psychological toll. You may be having to constantly monitor and watch your loved one's condition. You're experiencing what we call role reversal, so you suddenly become the mother of your mother, right? And you're dealing with that strange dissonance. And then, of course, you're moving through a world that doesn't recognize or support this. So your employer may well not accommodate your caring responsibilities. And it bears out in the statistics too. We know that caregivers have high rates of depression and anxiety for these reasons.
Given the fact that so few resources exist, I would imagine that also comes with a lot of assumptions and misperceptions. What are some of the most pervasive that you've come across when it comes to caregiving?
I think one of the most pervasive assumptions is that caregiving is kind of something that doesn't have any costs when it's performed by the family, right? So yeah, it's free, but we're not being paid, but there are enormous costs. When you're very elderly or very unwell, you need to be kept warmer, there's high energy costs, there's mobility aids, there's special diets, there's all of this kind of thing. So there's a material, practical reality there. The other misperception I encounter a lot is this idea that some cultures can manage this more naturally than white Western cultures, right? So that would typically be countries in the global south. And it is very much more normalized that they would perform care, for example, for their parents-in-law, not just their parents. But when you actually listen to them, they are struggling in exactly the same ways as I was, the same ways as women everywhere are, because care is hard. So we have to be very careful of making assumptions based on people's culture, ethnicity, nationality, and so on, and instead see that women around the world, we're all in the same fight here together.
And we here in the US, 1 in 5 adults right now are working as caregivers. How can we better prepare to care for these aging populations in the years to come?
What we need to do here is really recognize that humans are going to have to provide care, and so we need to embed policies that recognize that. That's things like paid caregivers leave from work, right? So at the moment, the Family and Medical Leave Act only provides unpaid leave, and in fact, the Department of Labour found that 41% of private sector employees aren't even covered by it. So there are these fundamental economic policies that we shouldn't even be having to ask for, frankly, because it's so obvious that they're necessary. But basically, we've arranged our work world as if we're not actually humans who love people who need us to step in, and that's got to change.
Emily Kenway, author of Who Cares? The Hidden Crisis of Caregiving and How We Solve It. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Medicaid is the nation's biggest health insurance program, covering nearly 80 million people. That's more than 1 in 5 Americans. For many people who have low incomes, are disabled, or who are either very young or very old, it's a vital government program in America's safety net.
So I feel like that would work. But white chocolate covered strawberries sounds amazing.
Like most college students, Mara Woods takes full advantage of mom's cooking while home from school. But on top of keeping up with classes and friends, Woods, who uses they-them pronouns, also balances their health.
There are definitely concerns about my ability to hold a job if I don't have the proper accommodations, or just kind of figuring out a life as a 21-year-old with a chronic illness.
Woods has a rare inflammatory skin condition called hidradenitis suppurativa. It causes painful cysts on their body. They take experimental medications and go to an Atlanta hospital every month for infusions of a drug to reduce inflammation. Can you imagine doing this without Medicaid?
Absolutely not. That has been the one thing getting me through this entire process. Without Medicaid, I wouldn't be able to receive this medication.
Medicaid is often the unsung hero of our public coverage system.
Joan Elker is the executive director of Georgetown University Center for Children and Families.
Not many people are aware that all poor children in this country have a right to Medicaid. Medicaid is also the primary payer for long-term care, and it's a key backbone of healthcare for low-wage workers.
The Harry S. Truman Library at Independence, Missouri is a scene of an historic event.
Medicaid was one of President Lyndon Johnson's Great Society programs. He signed the bill, creating it in 1965, offering states federal funds for providing basic health care services to families on public assistance and people with disabilities. It's voluntary, but by 1982, all 50 states and the District of Columbia had adopted it. Since then, both Democratic and Republican presidents have signed coverage expansions. By the late 1980s, the program covered all poor children and all low-income pregnant people.
On many of the basics, for example, access to primary and preventive care, Medicaid is performing about as well as private insurance. There are differences. Dental care is very hard to access, particularly if you're on Medicaid. Behavioral health care is another area where it's harder to access, but the answer is not to not give people Medicaid, because then they're in worse shape.
This is going to take a little while. In 2010, President Barack Obama's Affordable Care Act expanded Medicaid even further, offering states a generous subsidy if they covered all poor adults. Today, more than 21 million adults have Medicaid because of the ACA.
The marketplaces were kind of the new shiny toy, but Medicaid was kind of the workhorse, because the Medicaid expansion for poor adults was really the way in which more uninsured people access coverage. We see Congress turn to Medicaid time and time again because it's a system that's been in place, it works. Most recently, Congress adopted a new option to allow states to cover postpartum women and people for 12 months after birth.
Pain
Sometimes.
Dr. Keela Brown is Chief OBGYN at the Family Health Centers of Georgia. Many of her patients either are on Medicaid or pay on an income-based sliding scale.
Pregnancy can be very trying on a patient, whether it's emotionally or physically. And there are a lot of medical issues that can arise during pregnancy or that may have even existed before pregnancy that need continual treatment. Eating okay?
Georgia is one of at least 47 states that expanded Medicaid to cover women for a full year after giving birth. Before, Georgia covered only 6 weeks.
That finite period was just not sufficient in order to be able to treat any of those things that may have come about during pregnancy or even to put them in a better place post-pregnancy, whether it be for any cardiovascular issues, diabetic issues, which primarily affect the population that we serve. There's also some mental health issues that go along with being postpartum. So how are we doing today?
Okay, postpartum. It's been a little different this time around.
Okay.
Jerica Williams gave birth to her son, Bryce, 2 months ago. Bryce is also covered by Georgia's Medicaid program.
I really appreciate Medicaid. It takes a large burden off of me, takes some weight off my shoulders when it comes to make sure that my child is getting proper health care.
During the pandemic, the federal government increased Medicaid funding to states and prohibited them from kicking recipients out of the program even if they were no longer eligible. But when the COVID-19 public health emergency ended last May, states resumed checking eligibility, a process known as unwinding. So far, 11 million people have lost Medicaid coverage, including more than 4.5 million children. Some were no longer eligible, but others were dropped for bureaucratic reasons, like re-enrollment forms sent to an old address.
There are many, many ways that Medicaid is working really to essentially prop up our private health insurance system for people who don't have enough money to be able to afford private coverage, or for people who are disabled for whom the services that you typically get in an employer-sponsored package simply don't meet their needs. In our healthcare system, having coverage is the price of admission. And you're just not going to see a good show in our healthcare system if you're uninsured.
College student Meryl Woods will soon have to have their eligibility checked. They can't bear to think about the possibility they may lose coverage.
It's definitely terrifying. I go to the hospital a lot. I am in and out of appointments constantly. And so without it, there's a lot up in the air about what I could even do, what medications I could have, if I could still afford my medications. So definitely a very stressful time.
Tomorrow, we continue our series, America's Safety Net, with a look at Georgia's unique and controversial program that expands Medicaid coverage, but only to those who meet a work requirement. Finally tonight, as Women's History Month comes to a close, the next in our series, Hidden Histories. Tonight, Michelle Sandoval of Rhode Island PBS Weekly introduces us to a woman who embodies what it means to live a life of service, even when that service wasn't always welcome.
At the age of 100, Betty Fleming knows by heart all the notes to Over the Rainbow. A song that, much like her own life story, embodies hope. But the life that Fleming's created for herself in Providence is one she says she never could have imagined as a child.
That's the family home in San Antonio, Texas, which was just sold 4 years ago.
Growing up in South Texas, Fleming dreamed of being a nurse, but she learned it wouldn't be an easy path for a black woman.
There were no hospitals in San Antonio that would hire a nurse, a black nurse. The only thing I could do was private duty. And that was very expensive, and you're doing private duty for black patients, so you didn't have a lot of people who could afford a private nurse.
It was 1945. The United States was engulfed in World War II.
Noble women doing a hard job and serving the country in time of need.
Fleming's friend had joined the U.S. Cadet Nurse Corps, and she decided she wanted to do the same. Fleming was 21 when she enlisted in the Army as a second lieutenant. At the time, the armed services were still segregated.
You lived in a black dom, while other nurses lived in a white dom. You were separated that way.
When she was stationed at Fort Huachuca in Arizona, she met the man who would become her husband, Lieutenant Theodore Fleming, a doctor in the Army. The two went on to witness an historic moment. In 1948, President Harry Truman signed an executive order banning segregation in the military. By 1946, Fleming had left the Army and relocated to Providence, Rhode Island, and eventually took a job working full-time at Rhode Island Hospital School of Nursing. But after 2 years...
Somebody came into my husband's office and said, "I see you've got your wife working." That was it. I had to quit.
Because? Your husband did not want you working?
No, he wasn't too happy about it anyway. My husband is just so... Well, he was of that era. That's my daughter, Jackie. My son, Theodore.
Fleming became a stay-at-home mother for a few years, raising her 2 children, and then made a career change.
I decided, well, maybe if I went into public education, maybe that would help, because I would be out at the same time that my kids would be out.
For more than 4 decades, she served in various roles, from teaching to overseeing the district science curriculum. She also made history as the first black nurse to teach at Rhode Island Hospital. Service, she said, is in her blood.
I was taught that you give something back.
Fleming remains sharp and mobile at 100. She still drives and goes for a 2-mile walk in Providence 3 times a week. She lives with her 75-year-old son. She credits him with being able to maintain a high quality of life.
I'm so lucky, because people my age are stuck in nursing homes. Nobody to see them, nobody to do anything for them. But yet I still have people around me, and I have young people around me.
As you reflect on your life, the people you've met, the experiences that you've had, what is the most important lesson you think that you've learned?
You have to be kind. I try not to hurt people's feelings. And I know my kids don't think that. And I try not to get into people's business.
She says she remains focused on enjoying her own.
At this stage in my life, happiness is all I'm looking for.
For PBS News Weekend, I'm Michelle Sandoval in Providence, Rhode Island.
And that is PBS News Weekend for this Saturday. I'm John Yang. For all of my colleagues, thanks for joining us. See you tomorrow.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by
Consumer Cellular. This is Sam. Hello and welcome to Daybreak here on France 24. These are this morning's main news headlines. Israel denies responsibility after the UN says 3 of its observers and a translator have been wounded by shelling in southern Lebanon. It comes amid rising tensions along the border, across which Israeli troops trade near daily strikes with fighters from the militant group Hezbollah. With all eyes on Istanbul, voters in Turkey head to the polls this Sunday for closely fought local and mayoral elections. Bruised from last year's national ballot, the opposition is hoping to hold on to the major cities it took 5 years ago. And Pope Francis is gearing up to preside over Easter Sunday Mass at the Vatican after delivering a homily during the vigil service on Saturday. Pontiff's absence during the Good Friday procession at the Colosseum sparked further concerns about his health. have here with us. First this hour to southern Lebanon, where 3 UN observers and a translator have been wounded after a shell exploded while they were carrying out a foot patrol. Since last October, armed group Hezbollah has been trading near daily fire with the Israeli military across the border area known as the Blue Line. The Israeli military has denied involvement in the shelling incident. The UN peacekeeping mission says it's investigating the origin of the blast. Last month, it accused Israeli troops of violating international law by firing on a group of clearly identifiable journalists, killing one of them. Let's hear from their spokesperson.
In recent days, we have seen more lethal targeting, and this, of course, is worrying. And this can create a scope for miscalculation. Escalation can create miscalculation that could not be controlled and over for a wider conflict. And no one wants it, because a wider conflict would not only be between Lebanon and Israel, but would be a regional conflict. That's why it's important for the parties to understand that, to cease the fire, and to think about the political and diplomatic solution. There is no military solution.
As fighting rages on in Gaza, truce talks are expected to resume in Cairo this Sunday, days after the UN Security Council passed a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire. The Israeli military is continuing to strike dozens of targets amid warnings that hundreds of thousands are on the brink of famine. A 3-ship convoy left a port in Cyprus on Saturday with 400 tons of food and other supplies. With the latest on the ever-worsening humanitarian crisis in Gaza, here's Siobhan Silk.
A lifeline by sea. A small convoy of 8 ships operated by the Spanish charity Open Arms en route from Cyprus to Gaza, carrying precious cargo for people close to starvation.
We have canned product, we have flour, rice, we have dates, and this will be arriving the next days for the people of Gaza is receiving for the people of North. We're doing airdrops, and now we're doing this because there is not enough aid arriving to Gaza, and we need to open as many windows as possible.
Gaza needs hundreds of tons of food aid a day, and it's not feasible to deliver that volume by air or sea. But trucks haven't been able to bring enough in either, while Israel controls access to the enclave.
Between the 1st and the 22nd of March, 1/4 of 40 humanitarian aid missions into northern Gaza were denied. So let's be clear. Life-saving aid is being obstructed. Lives are being lost. Dignity is being denied.
Israel is under constant international pressure to open the gates.
I believe that Israel must allow massive unimpeded aid access to Gaza, as demanded by the International Court of Justice. Israel must also open all land crossings immediately and unconditionally.
In the early hours of Saturday, a rush to reach an aid delivery in Gaza City led to a stampede and gunfire. Several people were killed and dozens more injured, evidence of the sheer desperation that set in as the UN warns famine is imminent.
Israeli forces were accused of fatally shooting a 13-year-old boy during a pre-dawn West Bank raid on Saturday during confrontations in a town south of Jenin city. Violence has been escalating since the start of the war in Gaza, with frequent Israeli raids and Palestinian street attacks. Some of the deadliest fighting in the West Bank has centered in and around the Jenin refugee camp, from where our chief foreign editor Robert Parsons sent this report.
Look at all that. There's not a single house in the Jenin camp that's not been hit by bullets.
Abu Talal is a former fighter. Today, he's our guide through the narrow streets of the Jenin refugee camp, scene of almost constant clashes with the Israeli Defense Forces.
At least 3 people were killed in this mosque, and many more wounded. The occupiers hit it with drones, and maybe also a missile fired from an Apache helicopter.
Amidst the rubble and dust, the graffiti of war is everywhere, as are the images of fallen fighters, boys most of them, too young to have known much else. Not to forget, it says, referring to the Nakba of 1948, when so many Palestinians were driven from their homes by the Israelis. This is the centre of the Jenin refugee camp, which is itself the epicenter of Palestinian resistance on the West Bank to Israeli occupation. Since the start of the war in Gaza, fighting in the occupied West Bank has surged. 107 people have died in Jenin alone. Not even hospitals are sacrosanct. On January the 30th, CCTV cameras at the Ibn Sina hospital record the arrival of an Israeli hit squad, disguised as nurses. Among their targets, 2 brothers, members of the Jenin brigade, one of whom was recovering from his wounds. 2 months have passed since their deaths, too soon for the pain to have eased for Abir, their mother, but loss seems only to have sharpened her desire for revenge.
These are difficult days. Above all, I miss my boys. But thank God, every time we lose a son, we give birth to 100 more. That allows us to be patient and resilient. Thanks to God, Palestine gives us many children.
Abiyat's 2 sons are buried in a new cemetery. It's almost entirely full of victims of the latest bout of fighting. There's no shortage of men and women ready to die in this long conflict, and no shortage either of grieving mothers with little left to hope for.
As Christians around the world celebrate Easter this weekend in Gaza, some of those who are able to mark the religious festival have been attending a service at a church in Gaza City in darkness due to a lack of electricity. Many Palestinian Christians would usually visit Jerusalem at Easter, but since the start of the war, they've needed special permission to cross checkpoints into the city. An estimated 50,000 Christian Palestinians live in the West Bank and Jerusalem, while about 1,300 are in Gaza. Well, after his no-show at the Colosseum on Friday, Pope Francis is expected to preside over Easter Sunday Mass at the Vatican, after which he'll deliver his annual Urbi et Orbi blessing. The Pontiff took part in the Easter Vigil service on Saturday, a day after the last-minute cancellation of his presence at the traditional Good Friday procession revived questions about the health of the 87-year-old. Eliza Herbert has the details.
Pope Francis appears increasingly tired, his voice weak. Despite this, he sat in his armchair on Saturday in the heart of St. Peter's Basilica and presided over the Easter Vigil in front of thousands of worshippers. Just one day after his health gave rise to fresh concerns, when he abruptly cancelled his appearance minutes before the Good Friday procession, causing Vatican staff to hastily withdraw his seat. But for some of his 1.3 billion followers, it was only minor. They hope he will continue to lead the Catholic Church.
I think he'll get over it. He's a strong man.
Obviously, he's not young, but he's got a busy schedule that just won't stop.
In the halls of the Vatican, more and more people are thinking about his succession, though the Argentinian Jesuit has said he has no intention of giving up unless he no longer has the cognitive capacity to do so.
He says, as long as my head's all right, I'll run the church with my head, not with my knees, not with my legs. One of his doctors was interviewed not long ago in the Italian press, and he said, the Pope has the body of someone who's 87, but the head of someone who's 60. So as long as Pope Francis still has the head of a sexagenarian, he will continue to be the head of the church.
For the past 2 years, Pope Francis has been confined to a wheelchair and has had to restrict his movements. His most recent trip abroad was to Marseille last summer.
Well, his road to power began in Istanbul when he was elected mayor in 1994. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is determined to win back the city after his party was defeated there in the last mayoral elections 5 years ago. All eyes are on Istanbul as the country holds municipal elections this Sunday, and will say the outcome of the ballot is far from certain, with more on voter sentiment in the city described by Erdogan as the jewel of Turkey. Here's Jenny Shin.
On Sunday, Turkish voters will head to the polls. They'll cast their ballots to elect mayors, as well as provincial council members and other local officials. It's an election taking place in the throes of an economic crisis, and the first popularity test for President Recep Tayyip Erdogan after his 2023 re-election. The country's economic powerhouse, Istanbul, is Erdogan's main hurdle. His AK party's defeat in a rerun of the city's mayoral election in 2019 delivered a stinging blow to the president, who until then fronted an invincible image. But the voters' wandering gaze are set on other candidates, like Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu and former Environment Minister Murat Kurumu.
I want Ekrem İmamoğlu to win. Some are happy with him, others are not, but I like him. He has a more enlightened perspective. He's more humane.
Murat Kurum is a crown jewel. He's a man who visits the areas hit by earthquakes, not one who just sits at restaurant tables where there's alcohol. He visits the impacted areas. He's with the people. Voters say they want a leader that can rein in the country's rampant inflation and can provide safety assurances in the wake of devastating earthquakes last year. It's a high-stakes nationwide vote, one that could reinforce Erdogan's two-decade leadership or finally signal change in the NATO member country.
Arbitrary, disproportionate and abusive. The president of Peru is sitting out with local authorities after her home and office were raided by police in a dramatic twist to a case that erupted several weeks ago. Dina Boluarte is at the center of a corruption probe focused on Rolex watches she's been wearing publicly. The very unpopular president in power since December 2022 hasn't explained how she got them, saying only that they were the fruit of hard work.
A raid on the Peruvian presidential palace in the early hours of Saturday. A search for Rolex watches belonging to Dina Boluarte that she had not publicly declared. The investigation began 2 weeks ago when local media reported that the president was seen sporting the luxury timepieces at public events, raising questions on whether she illegally enriched herself while in office.
What did you find?
That's confidential. We're still going to search the presidential palace. The search is a judicial order from the prosecutor.
Boluarte, in office since December 2022, has acknowledged that she owns Rolex watches. Responding to questions earlier this month about how she could afford such expensive goods on a public salary, she said she'd saved up since she was 18 years old.
Les prometí. On the 7th of December 2022, I promised to work with clean hands. I walked through the front door, and I will leave through the same door on the 28th of July 2026 with clean hands.
Facing declining approval ratings, currently around 10%, Boluarte now faces another political hurdle. If she is indicted, the trial will only take place in the case of impeachment or after her term ends in July 2026.
Well, that is it from us for now, but do stay with us for more world news here on France 24.
On this Saturday night, cleanup begins in Baltimore. Crews begin operations to remove the collapsed bridge.
This is an around-the-clock operation.
The effort and the impact. Sudanese families struggling to reunite in Canada.
Frustrating units, highly insulting.
Their calls for swifter action from Ottawa as civil conflict escalates, plunging the nation into hunger and crisis. Easter indulgence hits hard as cocoa costs climb.
We're starting to get worried.
Digging into the bitter reality behind skyrocketing prices.
Global National with RNSO. Reporting tonight, Niku Gupsha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. After days of planning, measuring, and rounding up resources, crews in Baltimore have begun the painstaking task of cutting and lifting thousands of tons worth of twisted steel from the city's inner harbor. More than 370 workers and equipment from across the country are embarking on what's expected to be a months-long cleanup effort following Tuesday's deadly crash. Joel Senek has tonight's top story.
Massive machinery in the Port of Baltimore ready to spring into action. Officials say it's now time to get to work.
The Army Corps and their partners will begin to move forward with the crane operations today. The north sections of the Key Bridge are going to be cut up and removed.
It's the first step in a long and painstaking process of moving a piece, then reassessing the wreckage before another portion can come off.
Unified Command are conducting planning and engineering assessments 24 hours a day. This is an around-the-clock operation.
It's been that way ever since a cargo ship slammed into the bridge early Tuesday morning, killing 6 construction workers who were on the structure. More than a dozen pieces of heavy equipment will eventually be put to work on the river, including 7 cranes, 10 tugboats, 9 barges, 8 salvage vessels, and 5 Coast Guard ships. Once the debris is removed, the search can resume for the 4 bodies still believed to be under the concrete and metal.
One of our critical priorities has to and will continue to be bringing home the remaining missing workers so we can bring closure to their families.
The tragedy has opened a massive wound in the Baltimore community. The wife of one victim now speaking out through an interpreter.
I feel bad. Only God knows how hard my heart aches. Maybe he was desperate, trying to escape.
The impact also felt by the thousands who work at the port every day. The majority of its operations are still shut down.
So when there's no ships here, no cargo, there's no work. So it affects us greatly.
The federal government is offering low-interest business loans to keep the local economy afloat, but officials admit the pain of this tragedy will likely only be eased once crews are able to get the vessel and the debris out of the water for good. Joel Senek, Global News, Washington.
In the Middle East, truce talks between Israel and Hamas are reportedly set to resume tomorrow, with Israeli officials confirming to Reuters a delegation will travel to Cairo for negotiations. Meanwhile, as a 3-ship aid convoy departed from Cyprus today carrying more than 400 tons of food and supplies for northern Gaza, concerns linger about when it will arrive. The shipment is said to be enough to prepare more than 1 million meals for Palestinians. The U.S., meanwhile, conducted another round of airdrops over Gaza today, its 18th drop this month. Humanitarian groups say deliveries by sea and air are not enough, and stress a deal is needed to allow far more aid by road. In southern Lebanon, a morning explosion near the Israeli border wounded at least 4 UN military observers. Lebanon state news agency citing security officials reported the observers were targeted by an Israeli drone strike, a claim swiftly denied by the IDF on social media. While the UN called the targeting of peacekeepers unacceptable, it refrained from laying blame and stated it is investigating the explosion's origin. About 70 Canadian Armed Forces members have deployed to Jamaica as part of a multinational security support mission in Haiti. The federal government says they will provide training to military personnel from Caribbean community nations who are set to deploy to Haiti. CAF members will train troops from Jamaica, Belize, and the Bahamas in peacekeeping skills and combat first aid. The United Nations says Haiti needs up to 5,000 international police members to tackle catastrophic gang violence and help the national force regain control. The federal Liberals addressed pharmacare today as part of their pre-budget cross-country tour of announcements targeting younger Canadians. The first phase of the pharmacare plan involves providing contraception and diabetes medication to Canadians in need, with the Deputy Prime Minister confirming it will be included in the budget. Abigail Beeman looks at the Liberals' fresh approach to re-engage younger voters.
Many younger Canadians.
The latest in a whirlwind of pre-budget stops, a new commitment to include the first phase of pharmacare, free contraception, and better access to diabetes medication in April's budget.
For 9 million Canadian women, freedom of choice will truly be free. It will mean they don't have to pay
for the fundamental right of controlling their own bodies.
But there are no details about the cost.
We hope that the information of full costing will be indicated as soon as possible to ensure some women can get some sense of timing to help them plan.
And the plan needs buy-in from provinces.
Conservative premiers that say that they're going to withhold this from their constituents, from the people who live in those provinces, they're going to have to explain that to their people.
The Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, and ministers crisscrossed the country this week in a bid to bring back younger voters.
Unlocking the door to the middle class for millions of younger Canadians.
Promising relief for renters and a boost to the $10 a day childcare plan.
It's really them trying to get their message out outside of the one day on the calendar that many Canadians don't particularly mark on their calendar as budget day.
Former Liberal senior staffer Zita Asterbas calls the campaign-style communication strategy smart, given the challenge of trying to get the entire budget message out on budget day.
Get to young voters, motivate them to vote, but also an acknowledgement of the affordability challenges that young people face across the country.
Those challenges include a carbon tax hike coming Monday, with increased pushback.
No matter what poll you look at, it doesn't matter if it's a federal one, provincial, municipal, the number one issue is affordability. You have to give people a break.
An uphill battle for the Liberals to win back younger voters, including those who helped Justin Trudeau win his 2015 majority. Expect many more announcements and pre-budget news in the days ahead, with April 16th budget still 2+ weeks away. Abigail Beeman, Global News, Ottawa. The federal price on carbon is set to climb to $80 per ton of greenhouse gas emissions come Monday, intensifying the fight for its repeal. 3 provincial premiers appeared before a federal committee to pressure the Liberals to change course. The West Block's Mercedes Stephenson speaks with Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault on the mounting political pressure his government is facing to halt the impending price hike. Mercedes?
The carbon tax has become a political albatross for the governing Liberals. They've been attacked by the opposition and premiers, and the tax is deeply unpopular with some Canadians, with many still hoping that perhaps there will be a reprieve before the April 1st increase. The message from Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault, who joins us on the West Block this week, is don't get your hopes up. The government plans to stick to its guns. The hike will translate to about a 3-cent increase more per litre of gas, roughly making it about 17 cents in carbon tax. The hike will also come, though, with an increase to the federal carbon tax rebate, which the Liberals are hoping will help to allay concerns about the impact of the raise on the cost of living crisis. And when it comes to other options, like going harder after large industrial emitters instead of Canadians at the pumps, it seems like that's not on the table right now.
It's a balancing act. If we put too much pressure on industrial polluters, some may say, well, listen, this is too tough compared to some of our peers around the world, and you're having us compete at a disadvantage with other nations and companies in other nations around the world. So we have a plan that is balanced, that is asking big polluters to do more, way more than Canadians.
Experts have told us on the West Block that targeting large industrial emitters has a bigger impact than targeting individuals at the pump. I asked the Environment Minister whether that's something that the government would consider, putting more emphasis on those big industries. But he says there's a very real risk potentially to productivity. And that is something that the industry echoed over the past week, saying that the incoming oil and gas emissions cap could threaten their competitiveness. That cap would require emissions to fall by up to 38% below 2019 levels by the end of the decade. We'll also speak to the man once known as America's most important general. Former CIA Director General David Petraeus breaks down the threats from Russia, China, Iran, and terrorist groups, and just how precarious our security is in a changing world, and whether that means that Canada should spend more. Me too. All right, Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa. Thanks, Mercedes. Make sure to catch the West Block for insights on how the carbon tax will impact you. You can watch tomorrow morning right here on Global. Well, with summer approaching, Canadians are hammering out travel plans while trying to stay on budget. But for those looking for a more affordable Canadian airline, they won't have much choice. Flair Airlines is the last ultra-low-cost Canadian carrier operating in this country, but many wonder whether it can sustain. Sean Preble reports.
Flair Airlines has had a year of issues ranging from tax disputes to a technical issue that made booking a problem last weekend. And as the last ultra-low-cost carrier in Canada, the recent reports may leave those looking to book a vacation with concerns.
Flair has done a miserable job of maintaining the confidence of consumers who they rely on to buy advance purchase tickets.
Former Air Canada executive Duncan Dee says Canadians aren't always booking for a day from now, but months in advance. And the closure of links just last month has shaken consumer confidence. Flair CEO Stephen Jones says the closure was unfortunate, though notes it has led to an increase in demand for his airline.
We are the sole low-cost carrier left in the market, and it's a great place to be. We have the cost-sensitive leisure market here really to ourselves.
But low-cost airline models face challenges in Canada. Logistics professor Jacques Ross says among the issues, fees for things like airport improvement and security, which make taking off and landing in Canada costly.
If you subtract all of those fees, what's left is basically the revenue that the airline will receive, which is not a lot of money.
It's not just the fees that have impacted the airline. Flair faced a seizure order by the federal government in November over allegedly unpaid taxes, though it says it has a plan to pay off that amount. Ross says Canada's current economic climate leaves room for Flair as consumers focus on price.
They just want to get there as quickly and as cheap as possible.
After a turbulent year, Jones says he believes appeal has not dropped. He says once last week's technical issue was fixed, the company saw its biggest sales day ever. He says he's optimistic and expects not only a strong summer season, but a runway to ramp up the airline's fleet starting in 2025. Sean Preble, Global News.
There have been multiple road washouts in Newfoundland's west coast due to heavy rains over the last 48 hours. In the town of Cape St. George, parts of a major road were washed away. That's caused a complete road closure, cutting off half the town, stranding several hundred people. The province is working to make repairs and assess alternate routes. There were similar scenes in other parts of the province, including the city of Corner Brook, which saw more than 100 millimeters of rain last night. A legal battle over life choice. Coming up, a woman's will against her father's wishes on medically assisted death. This week, a Calgary judge ruled a 27-year-old woman should have access to medical assistance in dying, despite her father's attempt to block her request. The father argued she's not competent to make the decision to take her own life. But as Carolyn Curry de Castillo reports, a health law expert says the case could set a precedent for other medical procedures.
From the day a child is born, most parents' instinct is to protect, but what happens when a child wants to end her life? That's the issue being scrutinized in a Calgary courtroom.
A publication ban protects the identities of the father and the daughter. We're referring to the daughter as M and the father as W. Now, M lives with her father and told him back in December that she had been approved for medical assistance in dying. Her date of death was February 1st, but the father was granted an interim injunction the day before her death was set to take place.
According to court documents, the father believes she's not competent to make the decision and that she's generally healthy and believes that her physical symptoms, to the extent she has any, resulted from undiagnosed psychological conditions. The diagnoses described in court are autism and ADHD.
I think it's really important this case surfaces the need for everybody to understand that people with autism can absolutely have decision-making capacity.
Dalhousie University professor Jocelyn Downey emphasizes that the woman did not file any court documents explaining how she came to qualify for MAID.
It's really problematic that a lot of people are speculating and they're suggesting this is inappropriate because XYZ, but they have no way of knowing what her medical conditions are.
On Monday, Justice Colin Feasby ruled the choice to live or die with dignity is M's alone to make, and that M's dignity and right to self-determination outweighs the important matters raised by W. Justice Feasby said the pain of losing a child is not something that any parent should experience, but an injunction would put M in a position where she would be forced to choose between living a life she has decided is intolerable and ending her life without medical assistance.
So people can naturally be torn when they first hear about the case. But I think that there's very clear law and there's good reasons for protecting the woman's autonomy and feeling for the father, but not allowing him to override his competent daughter's wishes.
The decision sets aside the interim injunction, but it was stayed for 30 days to allow the father to appeal. Carolyn Curry, Castillo, Global News.
Ahead, Sudanese Canadians demand swifter immigration solutions for families torn apart by conflict. Sudanese Canadians are calling on Ottawa for swifter action to fast-track their relatives' immigration applications. The feds created a temporary program to reunite family members, but the process is slow and cumbersome. Sudan is in the grips of a civil conflict. Its military is fighting a paramilitary faction wanting to take over. Food is in short supply, and much of the country is either in crisis or a state of emergency. Mackenzie Gray reports on the struggle to reunite Sudanese with loved ones here in Canada.
The normal celebrations during Ramadan are muted this year in Sudan. How we eat, drink, meet people in Ramadan, all of that is no longer available, this man says. The reason? Nearly a year's worth of war between paramilitary groups and the government, which led to more than 8.5 million displaced people and 18 million facing worsening acute hunger, according to the United Nations. The crisis led Canada to send evacuation flights to remove over 400 Canadians stuck in the Northeast African country last April, but a new plan now aims to bring Sudanese family members left behind to Canada. 3,250 applications will be allowed, but the government is not guaranteed a set number of Sudanese will get permanent resident status, unlike previous programs helping people from Gaza, Ukraine, Syria, and Afghanistan.
So for these 3,250 applications, they might accept 10 applications, and then the program is over. I mean, that makes really no sense.
That's Reem Gafar, who's put up $35,000 to sponsor 3 family members.
It's very frustrating and it's highly insulting, even though we are trying to look at the positive side of the fact that this is a pathway to permanent resettlement.
That path requires numerous forms and biometric information like fingerprints, things that can be difficult to gather in a war zone.
There's constantly problems with internet and services, so how can we adequately translate all that information and the required or compulsory documents?
Soha Osman hoped to bring 6 family members to Canada, but can't afford to put up the money the federal government requires to sponsor any of them.
We're seeing now that these applications are going to fall into Canadian standard immigration processing times, which is up to 12 months, and that is almost 2 years after the war for an individual who was affected by conflict to actually seek safety in Canada. That's ridiculous.
In the month the program's been open, Canada has yet to accept any Sudanese. Prospective applicants have until next February or before the allotted application slots fill up to try and make it to Canada. Neither.
Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa tonight. Thanks, Mackenzie. Cocoa chaos. Next, the sticker shock for chocolate this Easter. Tonight, Pope Francis presiding over the Easter Vigil service at the Vatican, even as health concerns overshadow his participation for this weekend's holy traditions. On Good Friday, the pontiff canceled plans at the last minute to take part in a procession at Rome's Colosseum. But despite his need for a wheelchair, the Pope was able to give his blessings at tonight's ceremony in St. Peter's Basilica. If you've been out looking for some special Easter treats, you've likely already noticed the cost of chocolate has skyrocketed. Cocoa prices have more than tripled in the last year, putting pressure on chocolate makers. Mike Drolet reports.
Easter is a time of joy for chocolatiers. They get 2 craft bunnies of all shapes and sizes, line their walls with exotic cocoa blends, and show a little whimsy with handcrafted chocolate pandas. David Castellan has been running Soma in Toronto with his wife for 20 years, and they're happy making small batch specialty chocolates. But recently, they were shocked at the rising cost of cocoa butter.
It was $12. Right now it's $24, and it's headed towards $36.
And to make matters worse, one of their organic cocoa bean suppliers in Jamaica told them not to expect beans for 2 years after drought wiped out his crop.
We're starting to get worried.
Cocoa shortages have become a global issue due to the spread of bean disease in West Africa, which supplies 70% of the world's chocolate. And as production has waned, costs have gone up. For years, cocoa prices have been relatively stable, but this year's spike has been anything but sweet, with a staggering 241% jump, over 50% in the last month alone. And everyone in the business knows what will happen next.
But ultimately, in the long term, everybody that's in the chocolate industry will have to raise their prices.
Some of the larger chocolate makers have already begun developing recipes with lower cocoa content, and they could also trim costs with smaller bars and less expensive packaging. It won't be that easy for the specialty shops, which focus on quality over quantity.
We can adjust our formulas to have less cocoa butter, but you don't want to change your product too much. Like we have a successful product, people love it, so it's a bit of a tricky situation.
And a recipe for tough times ahead. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
Bittersweet indeed. That is Global National for this Saturday night. I'm Neetu Garcha. Tonight's Your Canada is Millennial Park in Dorval, Quebec. We love seeing Your Canada. Please keep emailing your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks so much for watching, and hope you'll join us again tomorrow. Have a great night.
Tonight, several developing stories as we come on the air. The terrifying moments on board a United jet, hitting severe turbulence as it tried to land. The incident coming as millions pack airports for the holiday rush. Efforts now underway to clear wreckage from the bridge collapse in Baltimore, cutting into the tons of mangled steel. And authorities in several states intensify efforts to crack down on home squatters. First, millions hit the skies and the roads. The TSA already seeing its busiest travel day of the year so far. Travel numbers reaching levels seen at the height of the Thanksgiving and winter holiday rush. Amid the crunch, a flight from Tel Aviv diverted as it tried to land at Newark Airport, hitting severe turbulence. Several passengers treated for motion sickness. The roads also packed despite higher gas prices. Our team tracking it all. The weather expected to have an impact in the west. More than 20 million Americans on alert for potential flooding as a powerful cross-country storm hits Southern California. Winter weather alerts from the California mountains into parts of the Rockies, creating hazardous driving conditions. That system sweeping east, expected to impact the Northeast early next week. Our weather team timing it all out. The unprecedented around-the-clock salvage effort gets underway in Baltimore. Officials bringing in heavy equipment, beginning the process to move millions of tons of wreckage from the Key Bridge. Our team talking to one of the last people to drive over that bridge before it came crashing down. His first television interview. Oversees the urgent effort to bring aid to Gaza. 3 ships loaded with 400 tons of much-needed food set off from Cyprus amid dire warnings of famine. Britt Clement from Israel. A determined Pope Francis prepares for Easter Sunday, returning for services amid renewed concerns about his health. The crackdown on housing squatters. New York, Georgia, Alabama, trying to make it easier for homeowners to get their property back, hoping to join Florida in changing the law and criminalize the practice. The Oregon man lucky to be alive. A runaway saw blade coming too close for comfort. And America Strong tonight. The young baseball player, what it took for him to reach his field of dreams. His message to live every day to the fullest.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us on this Saturday. I'm Mary Bruce in for Whit Johnson. We begin tonight with a terrifying air scare just as millions hit the roads for the busy holiday weekend. Several people becoming ill after a United Airlines flight headed from Tel Aviv to Newark, New Jersey encountered high winds and turbulence. That flight diverted about 70 miles northward to Stewart International Airport. Some passengers complaining of nausea, motion sickness, and chest pain. That plane eventually refueling and landing at its original destination, Newark International Airport. All this coming as the TSA screens its largest number of passengers of the year so far, more than 2.7 million on Thursday, outpacing travel on the Friday before Christmas and the day before Thanksgiving. And air travel is expected to get even busier as millions take to the skies ahead of the solar eclipse. ABC's Phil Lipoff leads us off tonight from Newark International Airport.
Tonight, airports across the country packed with passengers.
A lot of congestion at times.
The TSA screening more than 2.7 million people Thursday alone heading into the holiday weekend, making it the busiest day this year so far. More passengers than the Friday before Christmas and the day before Thanksgiving last year. What about the crowds? A lot of people traveling with you?
Yeah. Our plane was definitely more packed than it was going out.
But the holiday weekend not without incidents. A United flight from Tel Aviv to Newark making an unscheduled stop, diverting late Friday to Orange County, New York, after encountering heavy turbulence.
Yeah, it's quite windy today. They said the flight was pretty rough coming in to Newark, but we had multiple agencies here from Windsor and multiple surrounding agencies.
In a statement, United saying one passenger deplaned due to a medical incident, and a few other customers were seen by medical personnel for possible motion sickness.
They advised our crew that had multiple people on the plane complaining of nausea and chest pain from the turbulence.
The plane eventually making it to Newark. And if you're on the road this weekend, you will spend more on gas. Prices slowly rising through the year, with the average hovering around $3.53 a gallon. That's up 19 cents from last month's average and up 3 cents from this time last year.
And Phil Lipoff joins us from Newark International Airport. And Phil, even before this busy weekend is over, the FAA now with a heads up for next week as well.
Mary, you're right. The FAA predicting that next week will be the busiest of the spring break travel season. And a reminder, as you mentioned, there is a lot of excitement surrounding this total solar eclipse happening on April 8th. Many people making trips just for that, so travelers can expect some limited parking, even delays at airports right along the eclipse's path from Texas to Maine. Mary?
It will be something to see, Phil. Thank you. We turn now to the weather, and millions on alert in the west as a major storm brings flooding and heavy snow. This video capturing the swirling storm closing in on the coast, and heavy snow is slamming the San Bernardino Mountains in Southern California, causing low visibility and stranding drivers. Let's get right to Brittany Bell from our New York station WABC. She's tracking it all. Brittany, time this out for us.
Well, Mary, parts of California will see heavy rain and heavy snow for the rest of the weekend. Let's look at the latest alerts. A flood watch continues for Southern California. Also, winter alert stretching from California all the way to the Rockies. Look at Arizona, the entire state under a wind advisory. Gusts over 40 miles per hour are possible. So still pretty messy on Easter Sunday out west, but nicer the farther east you go. Spots like Oklahoma City and Nashville, high temperatures near 80 degrees and mainly dry. But the severe threat also moves east on Monday. Numerous severe storms are possible, stretching from Texas all the way to Indiana. They could produce damaging winds, very large hail, and tornadoes. Mary?
Okay, Brittany, thank you. We move on now to the urgent salvage and recovery efforts in Baltimore. These massive cranes are now being used to remove wreckage from the Francis Scott Key Bridge. Crews are working around the clock after the deadly bridge disaster. And tonight, we're hearing from a motorist who says he was one of the last to cross the bridge before it collapsed. Here's ABC's Jay O'Brien.
Tonight, 5 days after the collapse, the first pieces of debris, the Francis Scott Key Bridge, blocking Baltimore Harbor, now in the process of being removed. The start of a grueling process. Divers and other crews preparing to cut up pieces of the tangled steel to be lifted out of the water. That task made more difficult by dangerous debris. Sharp metal and electrical wires sent flying when that container ship lost power, colliding with the bridge.
We're talking about wreckage. We're talking about pieces of the Key Bridge that are in the water.
State leaders unable to say when the closed port tied to 8,000 jobs will reopen, saying their focus is on recovering the bodies of 4 missing construction workers presumed dead. That blocked off vital roadway, leaving people like Larry DeSantis, the head baker at Herman's Bakery, in the lurch. Every day for 16 years, Larry taking the Key Bridge back and forth, commuting in the overnight hours between his 2 jobs. Larry telling us he was one of the last people to cross that bridge just before its collapse.
What was it like seeing that video? Yeah, it was. Like I said, it makes me think. I'm really lucky.
You're lucky to be alive.
No, exactly. I mean, if I'd been 1 minute later, I wouldn't be here.
Locals here still reeling. Pam Rigby, one of the several catching their first glimpses today of the Baltimore skyline without the Key Bridge.
It's different from seeing it on TV than seeing it in real life. Right? You know, we're far away. You still feel it.
This collapse having such a huge impact on this community. Jay O'Brien joins us live from the Francis Scott Key Bridge. And Jay, what is the latest in the search for the missing workers?
Mary, the remains of 2 of those construction workers have been recovered, but divers have had to temporarily suspend the search for the others because of how dangerous officials say conditions have been out here on the water right now. Clearing all of this remaining debris is essential to that ongoing search effort. Mary?
We, of course, are thinking of their families tonight, Jay. Thank you. And tune into This Week tomorrow morning. Martha Raddatz speaks with Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen about those recovery efforts in Baltimore. And overseas now in late word tonight that ceasefire talks are set to resume tomorrow between Hamas and Israel. This is President Biden faces criticism for continuing to send billions of dollars in bombs and fighter jets to Israel as part of a long-standing agreement. And as a 3-ship convoy heads to Gaza to deliver food and other supplies amid concerns of starvation in the region. ABC's Britt Clennett in Tel Aviv tonight.
Tonight, the Biden administration sending a new round of weapons for Israel, despite a rift over an anticipated military offensive in southern Gaza. President Biden reportedly greenlighting billions of dollars worth of weapons as part of a long-standing agreement. The Washington Post reporting that the new arms transfer include 2,000-pound bombs linked to air attacks in Gaza, causing mass casualties. Some Democrats have been urging Biden to halt U.S. military support until Israel allows the delivery of desperately needed aid to Gaza, where the UN warns famine is imminent. It comes as a convoy of aid ships set sail today for Gaza, carrying 400 tons of food. UNICEF spokesperson James Elder speaking to me by phone, saying not nearly enough aid is getting in.
Malnutrition ward, like children that are paper thin, mothers and grandmothers, and they are standing over these desperately emaciated children. Yet there is a crossing 10-15 minutes away. This is what's so frustrating.
On the streets of Gaza, children sell whatever they can to stave off hunger. Mohammed saying he's trying to make money so my brothers and I can eat. Speaking from a makeshift camp in Rafah, Nima Asho's family are among the 1.3 million displaced people who could be evacuated if there is an Israeli land invasion, the city already facing Israeli bombardment.
You don't know when you are going to be attacked. Our neighbors has been killed. They were sleeping peacefully and they were killed. So each night we think we might be the next.
Mary, Israel says its goal is to destroy Hamas's capabilities, and we're told a delegation will leave for Cairo tomorrow for talks with Hamas again about releasing those hostages and a ceasefire. Mary?
All eyes will be on those talks, Britt. Thank you. Pope Francis is back on the job today, presiding over the Easter Vigil. That's after skipping a Good Friday procession to preserve his health ahead of the busy Easter Sunday. The 87-year-old pontiff has faced multiple health issues in recent months and now needs a wheelchair or a cane to move around. Here's ABC's Inez de la Catera.
Tonight, Pope Francis presiding over the solemn Easter Vigil on Holy Night in Rome. Close to 6,000 people packing St. Peter's Basilica.
Ascoltiamo con cuore sereno la parola di Dio.
The Pope sitting most of the time, earnestly delivering a 10-minute homily, and in the darkened cathedral, stepping back into the spotlight after skipping the way of the cross procession at the last minute on Good Friday. The Vatican says to preserve his health ahead of the weekend's events. The Pope shaking hands, smiling, looking sprightly as he left Saturday's service. The Pontiff is 87 years old and suffers from mobility and respiratory issues. Just last month, he contracted the flu and was taken to the hospital for tests, but the Pope maintains he has no serious ailments. This week, he appeared to be in good health, reading his prepared remarks in full on Wednesday and washing the feet of women prisoners on Holy Thursday, performing the ritual of service from his wheelchair.
Indulgentia veniet, consolatio tribuatur.
And earlier Friday, leading a 2-hour service at St. Peter's Basilica. And we're also expecting to see the Pope deliver a message of hope and peace at Mass tomorrow for Easter Sunday. He's set to offer his blessings to a packed St. Peter's Square and to over 1 billion Catholics around the world. Mary?
Okay, Inez, thank you. Back here in the U.S., a growing crisis in America, squatters versus homeowners. It's prompting some states to crack down. Florida now the first state to criminalize squatting. The question, will others soon follow? More now from ABC's Jacqueline Lee.
Tonight, the growing crackdown on squatting. New York, Georgia, and Alabama working on legislation to join Florida in criminalizing the Brazen Act this week.
You are not going to be able to commandeer somebody's private property and expect to get away with it.
Nationwide, squatter laws vary state to state with no nationwide enforcement directive. If a homeowner discovers a squatter, law enforcement's hands are tied because it's considered a civil matter.
If you touch me again.
2 moms in Los Angeles found this out the hard way after a squatter commandeered this $3 million property down the street.
You know, it's a constant problem. They're around, they're helping themselves to neighbors' packages.
In New York City, under state law, a squatter is considered a tenant after 30 days, and because it's a landlord-tenant dispute, the homeowner is forced into a lengthy court process to evict them. One squatting incident in New York turned into a murder investigation. A 52-year-old woman found in a duffel bag after discovering squatters in her late mother's vacant apartment.
Squatters are self-entitled, criminal-type people.
Flash Shelton, who calls himself the squatter hunter, says he helps homeowners across the country get rid of squatters by moving in with them and out-squatting the squatter.
I own a home, and you're telling me someone can just come in and set up shop, and they don't have to leave.
Yeah, I've had many cases where people are just on vacation. You call the police, and they just say, look, I live here, and you have a civil matter on your hands.
Mary, when a homeowner takes a squatter to court, it can take years and thousands of dollars just to get them evicted. What the new Florida law does is distinguishes between a tenant and a squatter, allowing law enforcement to remove the squatter immediately. It goes into effect July 1st. Mary?
Such a challenge to address this growing problem. Jacqueline, thank you. Now to an emotional day here in New York. Thousands of mourners gathered to pay their final respects to fallen NYPD officer Jonathan Diller. He was gunned down earlier this week during a routine traffic stop in Queens. NYPD officers joining the procession to a church in Long Island. Diller, a 3-year NYPD veteran, leaves behind a wife and a 1-year-old son. There is still much more ahead here on World News Tonight this Saturday. The dramatic rescue in the Gulf of Mexico, the Coast Guard pulling a lone kayaker to safety, and the terrifying near miss captured on camera. Why one Oregon man is lucky to be alive. Next tonight, a dramatic rescue in northern Florida. The Coast Guard locating a missing kayaker in the Gulf of Mexico after an exhaustive hours-long search. Crew members rappelling from a helicopter to reach him. Friends and first responders aiding in the search for Chris Smelly, a former South Carolina quarterback and father of 4, who is expected to recover. And staying in Florida, 10 people were rescued when their airboat flipped over in Everglades National Park. Officials say the boat turned suddenly, causing the passengers to fall into the water, the boat then landing on its side. One person was treated at the scene for minor injuries. The airboat operator was arrested. Officials say he lacked the proper certification. And an Oregon man is shaken but alive after a really close call. Take a look. A surveillance camera shows the man walking into a convenience store. Just behind him, a massive 4-foot-long saw blade violently rolling in his path. The impact so powerful it shook the store. A local natural gas company says the blade appears to have come loose during a repair. Quite a close call. And when we come back, nearly $1 billion up for grabs as tonight's Powerball lottery jackpot soars. And will superstar Caitlin Clark and her Iowa Hawkeyes keep dancing? The news just coming in straight ahead. To the index now in the march to the Final Four. This afternoon, the number 3 LSU Lady Tigers pulling off an upset of number 2 UCLA, coming from behind in the game's thrilling final minutes. And just before we came on the air, Caitlin Clark's Iowa Hawkeyes dominating number 5 Colorado to keep dancing. Clark playing in her final collegiate season, hoping to avenge last year's loss in the title game. And who wants to be an almost billionaire? Tonight's Powerball jackpot is a cool $935 million. No one has matched all 6 numbers since New Year's Day. Time to get those tickets. And when we come back, the young first baseman's return to his team. Why it's about more than just baseball. And finally tonight, America Strong, the young man who's faced the toughest of challenges, returning to his field of dreams. Since he was a young boy, Jacob Fagundes has loved baseball, the field like a second home to him.
It's kind of like my comfort place. It's a place where I feel understood. I feel like I belong.
This week, the 17-year-old was back on the field playing for the El Diamante High School Miners. That hit an extraordinary feat. For the past 4 years, Jacob has been fighting for his life after being diagnosed with a rare blood cancer.
I took it hard, but my goal the entire time was just to get back on the ball field.
Jacob's coach has nothing but admiration for him.
Jacob's a warrior. He's been through more than any of these boys that I can even consider or think about.
I just told myself I gotta be meeting someone I love.
After half a dozen rounds of chemotherapy, Jacob went into remission, but then another curveball came his way.
I got re-diagnosed, and I'm like, okay, round 2, but I'm gonna get back out there.
To beat the cancer this time, doctors told Jacob he needed a bone marrow transplant. Luckily for him, his older brother, Joey, turned out to be a perfect match.
I really got to save my life, and he's a big reason why I get to come out here every day.
After 4 years keeping his passion for baseball and hope alive, he returned as first baseman.
I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to wake up and play this game every day.
Tonight, Jacob sharing this message.
Something I learned from this journey is to never take life for granted. You gotta live every day like it's your last, because you never know when it will be. And keep swinging for the fences.
Keep swinging for those fences, Jacob. Thank you for watching. I'm Mary Bruce. Have a great night.
Thank you for making World News Tonight with David Moore, America's most watched newscast.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.